January 7, 2010. I was minding my own business on my property, sawing a fallen tree into 45-centimeter long pieces for firewood, when I heard a shot from a gun. It was January, and there was frost, like a witch's chest, -18 degrees Celsius, and the ground was covered with snow. My land was too large for a shot to be fired from beyond its borders. In these pine forests, where the trees are still decorated with snow and ice, the sound, even from a gun, quickly fades away. Someone was hunting on my land. Naturally, I didn't like it at all. I lived here for the sake of solitude, to be away from people and the law, but there are too many incompetent people here who should not be given a gun in their hands. They hardly know where the bullet is coming from. During my time in the States, I saw too many of those who operate on the principle of ready, shoot, aim. And the last thing I wanted was for someone to wander around and possibly send a stray bullet in the direction of my cabin. So I did what any man would do. I took my gun, a Thompson 36 Springfield, and headed in the direction of the shot. I already had my model 1911 45 Colt automatic strapped to my belt. I never left the hut without it. With 1.5 feet of snow on the ground, I needed snowshoes to help me move faster and not get tired too quickly. Wading through knee-deep snow with an icy crust on top is no fun, especially for my 55-year-old legs. I had just reached the top of the hill when I noticed him, about 40 meters away from me, with his back to me. He shot a small moose. From the sound of the shot, I expected him to be further away. The man had to be a good shot. The man was on foot and seemed to have no way of getting the elk out of here. I already had a loaded cartridge, and I began to approach him. I was going to announce myself before I approached, but I still wanted to close the distance first. I got about 25 meters when he finally heard me and turned around. "Don't you dare move, idiot," I roared. "You are hunting on my land." He was smart. He realized that I was ahead of him, and he simply raised his hands up. He was wearing a nice parka with fur lining around the hood and a snow cap underneath. His face was covered above his nose, leaving only his eyes visible, hidden behind winter glasses. "Don't shoot, I didn't know this was someone's land." But it was not a man's voice that sounded through the mask, but a woman's, muffled, although her breath condensed in the winter air. I ignored the fact that he turned out to be a she. "How the hell were you going to drag 500 kilograms of elk out of here by yourself? Even if you butchered it on the spot, it's still 300 kilograms. I have a snowmobile and a sled right over that hill. I was going to pull him out of my cabin that way." "Where is your hut?" I was still not in a friendly mood, although perhaps a little less hostile after learning that my intruder was a woman. "About a kilometer in that direction," she said, pointing northwest. "If you're only a kilometer away, your hut is on my land." "Please, mister, I didn't know this was anyone's land. There are no fences, no roads, no trails, nothing. I just built it the best I could." With these words, she took off her glasses and lowered her hood so that I could see her clearly. "I'm Linda Grant." With that, she extended her hand to me. Well, at that moment, I had a choice. Be the bastard that I usually am. Or polite, and I chose to be polite, took off my sunglasses even in the forest. The sun on a snowy field can be blinding, and extended my hand, now that I was close enough to shake it. "My name is Claude Duvalier." Linda looked a little surprised, as if my name was strange to her. Yes, I guess she was surprised because I didn't sound like a francophone. But I have one more question. "The hut is a kilometer away from here, huh? By the small stream at the bottom of the gorge, near the big rocky outcrop?" Some geological event had pushed one large ledge into an area where there weren't many, and if this was the site of her hut, I knew it for sure. And Linda realized that I knew. "Yes," she said, somewhat hesitantly. "Look, I know this shack, and you can't call it a shack. To call it a shack would be an insult to real shacks." I tidied her up a little. I just stood there, looking at her. Then I looked at her gun leaning against the tree and was simply amazed. No wonder she took a head shot. "Did you kill a moose with a .22? "This is all I have," she explained. Well, what was I supposed to do? She lived in a broken-down shack in the middle of winter in New Brunswick, and all she had for hunting was a small-bore rifle that, even with a 22 long rifle cartridge, did not have enough stopping power. The bears have been hibernating, but once spring comes they will wake up and be hungry, and a 22 won't protect you from a bear looking for food. The only reason the bears didn't completely destroy this shack was because there were no food odors coming from it. But in the spring this will change. Well, damn it, Linda, go get your car and I'll help you load the carcass. I love my solitude, having learned to love it the hard way when it was forced upon me. But despite the tasks I had to do to survive the winter, they couldn't take my mind off Linda. She was clearly about my age and knew a thing or two about life in the forest, but she was woefully unprepared. She said that tidied up the shack, but it would have taken time and money for materials, and I hadn't heard a word about anyone being in the old shack, just a kilometer from my shack. How much could she really do? It had an old wood stove, but the roof was leaking and the door wouldn't close tightly. Naturally, there was not a single strip of insulation there. The building was made of boards and battens, but I knew that some of the battens were missing. There was an outer shed for storing dry firewood, but it was empty. What firewood she had probably not been dried, which meant it was difficult to keep burning and produced little heat. How long could someone survive there? This winter has been light so far, with a few snowfalls of just a couple of inches, although they have accumulated over time to more than a foot. What would happen if a nor'easter came here and immediately dumped a foot of heavy snow on this place? Hell, it could have completely brought down the roof of that old shack. It gets dark early here and the sun rises late. I have already prepared firewood, lit the fireplace, and started preparing dinner. I had plenty of deer meat, both smoked, dried, and frozen, and pre-thawed the frozen steak for dinner. I had a lot of fresh vegetables in the root cellar because I had a good harvest in the garden in the fall. Cabbage keeps well in the garden until the end of December, so it was still fresh, and even in the cold my 3 hens continued to lay eggs. For some reason, I cooked more dinner for myself than usual. It was as if I was cooking for company, as much company as I could get, even though I knew I wouldn't have any. Linda was the only person for miles, and she didn't know where my hut was. Even if she knew, once the sun set, the temperature would quickly drop to 30 C, and it would be deadly to venture outside in the dark now. Thinking about Linda sitting in that shack, I realized how lucky I was. The real Claude Duvalier laid out the place well, with a metal roof that shed snow. Ample insulation in the ceiling. Log walls did not require additional insulation, since they were almost a foot thick, and reliable windows. He sealed up the cracks in the hut well, and I continued to maintain it after his unexpected death. When I got up in the morning, my decision was made. If Linda was here, trying to survive in this miserable shack, she must be running from something, and if there's anyone who can understand that, it's me. I fed the birds and collected their 2 eggs, and made myself a nice breakfast, including biscuits and bacon. Bacon was one of my few pleasures, as I did not like to go into town more often than necessary. The real Claude's old age pension arrived once a month, directly into his bank account in Fredericton, and with my previously fake, but now real ID, I went to withdraw his pension every month. I stocked up on my pleasures, whatever they were, and then returned back to the forests. Well, if I was surviving on a dead man's pension, against the law, what was Linda doing? This thought haunted me. Her accent sounded like she was truly Canadian, perhaps more Ontario than New Brunswick. Yes, she was definitely running away from something. A little before 11, I began preparing the stew for the evening. Some deer meat, potatoes, carrots, some green onions, celery, and spices, all in a pot and on the stove to simmer over low heat. I grabbed my guns, made sure the snowmobile was filled with fuel. I usually kept it filled. The emptier the tank in winter, the more condensation there is, and off we go. No matter how much Linda had tidied up the shack, it still looked pretty ruined. She strung a bright blue awning over the roof and doubled it as a repair for leaks. The ropes, pulled as tight as a woman of her size could, held the double awning attached to the eaves, but it was easy to see that a strong wind from the north, such as occurs during nor'easters, could lift the awning and possibly tear it off. The two missing slats on the east side, the side I was approaching from, were sealed with something like an aerosol of insulating foam, while a new strip showed where the third one had been repaired. The woodshed was about a quarter full, and the wood had already been split to dry, but it certainly wouldn't be enough to last through the rest of the winter. Her snowmobile was surprisingly far away, about 50 yards from the shack, and I could see tracks in the snow where she was dragging the elk carcass toward the shack. An old freezer with a latch lock stood on bricks. No electricity was needed to keep the meat cold in the Canadian winter. There was a beat-up Chevrolet pickup parked next to the cabin, but the snow around it indicated that it had not been driven since the beginning of winter. The toilet was located to the east, away from the shack, which was good because the door looked like it was going to fall down. Linda heard my snowmobile as I approached and quickly walked out, holding her pathetic gun. She should have guessed it was me, but she clearly didn't want to take the risk. I walked up as if I owned the place, which, in fact, I did. Or at least it belonged to Claude. I certainly wasn't going to tell her my secret. "What do you want, Claude?" she called me. I could hear. She had so little, and she was ready to defend it. She didn't know me personally, except that her shack was on my land, and if I tried to kick her out, she would die. This pathetic truck would never have made it out of these forests onto the road, almost a kilometer away, not through this snow. I had to see you, Linda, to see how you were surviving. Don't worry, I'm not going to try to kick you out, but I know the condition of this old shack, and winter is far from over. If we get caught by the nor'easter, I'm not sure this place can hold up. I could see it was reluctant, but Linda invited me inside. It was worse than I expected. She may have stopped the roof leak with the awning repairs, but there was still a musty smell from all those previous years of water seeping inside. Old threadbare carpets were hauled in to help insulate the floor, and old newspapers and carpeting are attached to the walls and underside of the roof. I wouldn't use the word ceiling to minimize drafts. Her bed, such as it was covered with old blankets and her spare clothes to better keep her warm during the night. A fire was lit in an old stove, the chimney of which had been repaired, using a sheet of tin secured with 2 clamps. It was a setting for carbon monoxide poisoning. "Linda, why is your snowmobile so far from home?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I ran out of fuel," she admitted, her voice lowering, ashamed of her answer. "Look, I don't know what you're running from, but you can't survive like this. Let's move to my hut. I have much nicer equipment there, and we already have a dinner of stew ready. I can even give you some dried firewood, so you can get more warmth here." Did she trust me? She was obviously wary, but the mention of a delicious dinner and a really warm cabin piqued her interest. "Who said that I'm running away for some reason?" "Oh God, woman, even Stevie Wonder can see it. You don't have to tell me what's going on, but I don't want to think about you here, slowly dying in this place. I don't have gas for the car. Do you have anything that can be used as a siphon hose?" She didn't answer, but went outside and returned with a couple of feet of old hose. Then I went outside, took her empty gas can, and poured about 3/4 of my tank into it. "Leave your sled fastened and follow me." I waited while she refueled her snowmobile, then grabbed some more wood to light the stove since she would be gone for a few hours. As she started the car, I started mine and headed east toward my cabin. I was tempted to look back to see if she was following me, but I restrained myself. At least I could hear her behind me. When we arrived at my cabin, I told her to park at my woodshed, which she did, and then I began loading the split wood onto her sled. I had about 8 cords of split and dried firewood, and she obviously needed some help. We loaded the sled. The exercise helped keep us warm, and then I covered the stacked firewood with a tent in case it started snowing. I topped up my snowmobile to prevent condensation overnight. I could see that she really liked my hut, even from the outside. The front porch faced south and was a real porch, 8 feet deep to keep the snow away from the door. The exhaust from the wood stove chimney was almost clear, indicating a hot, clean burn, meaning the cabin was warm. Linda didn't say anything, but when she took the cover off her face, I could see her smile. The interior was everything she could have dreamed of. Oh, it wasn't a big cabin by any means, because it was never intended for a family. However, there was a separate kitchen area, plus a sofa which had seen better days, I admit, and a large bed covered in blankets. The toilet, I told her, was about 50 feet away on the north side. I had oil lamps for lighting, but she quickly turned her attention to the electrical lighting wiring. I saw the question in her eyes and answered without waiting for her to ask. I have a hydroelectric generator on the creek, but the creek is frozen now. There is a gasoline generator in the barn if I need electricity, but most of the time I don't need it. I have enough light to read. There were many paperback books in the cabin, and I have propane for the stove. I even have a reservoir so I don't have to melt the ice and snow. This is truly wonderful, Claude, she told me, her eyes full of surprise. Then I saw it. She began to at least half trust me, as shown by her taking off her parka and hat. I checked the stew, stirred it to make sure it wasn't burnt on the bottom, and then sat down on the couch. Let me tell you a story, I said, about a boy named Jack Armstrong who was called the All-American Boy. September 27, 1973. Damn, everything was going so well. Somehow I came across this sweet girl, much more beautiful than I could ever have dreamed of, and so we kiss in my 1962 Ford Fairlane in a grass parking lot near Waynesboro, Virginia. I was 19 years old and still a virgin, but it seemed like that status might end tonight. Jody was tall and soft in my arms, an eager kisser, and when I nervously moved my hand from her waist down to her hips, almost to her butt, she didn't stop me, didn't resist. When my hand was finally on her ass, she just pressed herself even closer to me. When I started to tug at her shirt because of the way it was tucked into her pants, she smiled and simply said, "Here, let me." With these words, she pulled back a little, undid the button holding the waistband of her jeans, and unzipped the zipper. However, it didn't go that fast because she pulled me into her arms again, and we started kissing again. I was stupid and didn't unbutton my own jeans, mesmerized by the way she was unbuttoning her pants, but when we started kissing again, I felt her hands tugging at my shirt. I guess my inexperience was noticeable because it didn't take long before Jody smiled at me and asked, "You've never done this, have you?" I'm pretty sure she already knew the answer. No, I didn't, I managed to choke out, embarrassed by this answer. But apparently I shouldn't have been shy, because this answer brought a huge smile to her face. "So I'll be your first." It was clear, this thought excited her very much. It's a shame we don't have a real bed. "There's a blanket in the trunk of the car," I managed to get out. "Great," she said, "get him." It was a little annoying to get out of the car and open the trunk, but Jody quickly reignited the passions by laying out a blanket on the grass and then laying down on it. "Come here, big guy," she encouraged me, and we immediately returned to the atmosphere we had in the back seat of the car. However, even though she said that I was going to have sex with her, I still kind of hesitated, not knowing what step to take next. Finally, Jody took the initiative. March 30, 1974. The whirlwind courtship ended, and now it's Saturday afternoon and Jody and I are married. We didn't have a lot of money, but her parents were able to pay for a modest wedding. That was all we needed. Jody was a couple years older than me. She had gotten an associate's degree in nursing and had gotten a good job at a hospital in Charlottesville. She was new, so they put her on night shifts, but damn, it paid well. I spent 3 semesters in college before admitting the obvious. I'm just not a student. I just drove around Charlottesville until I found a construction site and started working part-time with workers looking for work. I ended up getting a job laying wires for an electrician, making $8 an hour, which was a lot of money back then. I thought, who knows, maybe I can learn enough to become a self-employed electrician. January 11, 2010. Well, that's the beginning of the story, Claude. This Jack Armstrong, wasn't that you in a past life? Oh, I don't know about that. Well, let's see, you're in your 50s now, right? 1973, 1974, you would have been in your 20s. I was born March 7, 1954, so yes, you're right. 1954, huh? That makes you 4 years older than me. Linda warmed up to me and seemed happy. Of course, she was warm in my cozy hut. This should have helped. I can make coffee if you want. I have an old coffee pot. Oh, that would be great, Claude. I haven't had real coffee in like 6 months. With that, I took the coffee pot out of the bottom cabinet, washed it, it hadn't been used for several months, and started making coffee. Linda stood up to join me in the kitchen. With this came a certain mature smell. Yes, in the forest, in winter, it is difficult to wash. I guess I frowned or something because she noticed and stood back apologetically. Look, Linda, I understand. I have a sauna if you want to use it, and I can find you some clean clothes, even though they'll be too big for you. In the north, in the forests, without running water, a sauna is a way to wash. People evaporate dirt and toxins in dry heat, and then douse themselves with water to wash everything away. It may not replace a long, hot shower, but it's what we have. I can shower at the gym in Fredericton on days when I have to go into town, but those days are few and far between. I saw the concern in her eyes and quickly added, "Don't worry, you can use the sauna alone while I wash your clothes." Would you do this for me? Sure, why not? We're neighbors, aren't we? There's a gas hot stone heater in the sauna, and I can run that and fill the buckets with snow. By the time the sauna heats up, it'll all melt. With that, I gave Linda a pair of my smallest jeans, worn out but still wearable, plus an old Uva sweatshirt, and then went outside to fire up the sauna. By the time I returned, she was looking rather funny, wearing her parka and boots, but with bare legs. Apparently, she was not going to put on my clean clothes until she washed herself. She held my spare clothes in her hands and hurried to the sauna when I returned to the house. I had to admit, her clothes were dirty. I pumped water into a large pot on the kitchen sink. I have a hand pump as well as an electric one in case of a power outage, and set the pot on the stove to heat the water. I then filled the sink itself with rinse water. Long underwear, a long-sleeved t-shirt, a heavy flannel shirt, heavy socks and jeans all went into hot water with detergent, and believe me, the water quickly turned brown. I removed most of the dirt and then began rinsing the clothes, item by item, twice each to give them the appearance of being clean. I don't have a dryer. All I could do was wring them out and hang them to dry. I was cleaning and drying my own clothes this way, so the clothesline was already taut, but it made the cabin feel more cramped. Linda returned looking much better, except for the hair that was still stuck to her scalp. I quickly offered to heat up some more water so she could wash her hair in the kitchen. No a sink, an offer she gladly accepted. You know, I really don't know how to thank you for all this. You didn't have to do this for me. It's the little things. It's always nice to have someone to talk to. I checked the stew pot. It was stewed well. Well, if you want to talk, tell me more about Jack Armstrong, the American boy. Who is he, and is he still with Jody? June 12, 1988. 14 years later, I realized what was happening. Jody was always beautiful and outgoing. I knew that from the very beginning. The problem was that she was a very attractive nurse, now with a bachelor's degree in nursing, working at the University of Virginia Hospital, surrounded by doctors, medical students, and all sorts of guys with bright futures. And I was just an electrician, not even independent, but working for a commercial construction company. It was still an hourly job, and if it was a pretty good hourly rate, I was still a worker in dirty overalls going home every day. Jody was gorgeous, and well, looked like I was 34 years old, if not more. My hands were calloused, my nails were cracked, and I always seemed to be wearing a bandage or two over punctured or cut skin. Jody had a brief affair, actually just a casual affair, a few years ago. I found out about it, but never talked about it because it was after everything that happened, and I tried to just forget that it happened. I think Jody knew that I knew, but I was never sure. But this was not a one-time mistake. She began a relationship with a doctor in the emergency room at Yuva Hospital. I wasn't sure how long it had been going on when I found out, but I was definitely considering my options. I spoke to a divorce lawyer, although Jody didn't know about it, and he told me that most likely I would get my half and she would get hers. Jody made more money than me, but we had no children and no house to pay, for we always rented, so child support was unlikely. We will each go our own way, he said. I asked about an alienation of feelings lawsuit against an emergency room doctor, but while the lawyer didn't laugh at me, he said those types of cases had gone out of fashion and were hard to win. Juries are most often made up of women, and female jurors tend to sympathize with the wives in such cases. We had about $30,000 in a joint savings account, and I was going to get my share, so I waited patiently while withdrawing cash. If you withdraw too much cash at once, the bank notifies the feds, who look for signs of drug purchases. Luckily, we had a history of foreign holidays. We were in France last year, and our savings account was earmarked for just that. I was able to withdraw more than my half, $22,000, when Jody told me she needed to go to a nursing conference in Chicago. Yes, sure, these things happen, but Jody had never gone to an event like this before, and I knew right away that she was going to go with the damn doctor. I just didn't know where they were going. The only thing I could do was keep an eye on her. I didn't need to take her to the airport. She said that she would drive herself to Marcia, a friend who was also going to the conference, and park her car with her. Marcia would then put her car in long-term parking at the airport. So the night before she left, I rented a car and parked it around the corner. The morning Jody was supposed to leave, I left for work, but I actually just parked my truck around the corner, got into my rental car, and waited for Jody to leave. It didn't take long. She came out less than 20 minutes later, got into her car, and drove off. She was in an unrecognizable car, unaware that she was being followed, and I saw her drive into an apartment complex near the hospital. She left and headed to apartment number 2C. I waited and watched. Was she going to spend a whole week barricaded in this bastard's apartment, or what? Whatever it was, I was going to ruin her big plans, rush into them, swing and threaten them, maybe hit the bastard with a butt, and then go to the hospital and tell HR that one of their doctors is sleeping with a married nurse. Then I would call my lawyer and tell him where to file Jody for divorce. However, things turned out differently. A few minutes later, I saw Jody and the bastard come out arm in arm, with him carrying 2 large bags. They got into Jody's car and drove off, so I followed them, staying just far enough away to avoid being seen but not to lose sight of them. And I thought I had lost them when she eventually turned onto this mountain road leading into the southwestern mountains. I didn't notice the turn and had to make a quick U-turn to get back after them. I accelerated down this mountain road and would have lost them again if I had not noticed a cloud of dust where the car turned left onto the gravel road. I didn't see any other cars, so I assumed it must be them and turned onto the road behind them. If I had made a mistake, I would have lost them for sure. I was not mistaken. As the dust thickened, I slowed to a crawling pace when I realized the car had turned into a driveway with a private road no trespassing sign to a mountain hut. Luckily, they didn't notice me as I stopped the car, got out, and crept up to a large rock and trees. It was Jody and the bastard taking their bags out of the trunk of the car and heading into the cabin. This was not a place to rent. It looked like a private cabin, a private brothel, if you will. I'd bet that bastard has brought Jody here before. I took my .45 and a Bowie knife and crept up to the cabin. January 11, 2010. Damn, that must have been terrible, Linda told me. And all you were going to do was barge in and ruin their weekend? I know I hesitated before finally answering. Yeah, I guess. I can't say I had any specific plans, but I didn't go there with the intention of killing anyone. The problem is that when you have a gun, not intending to kill someone doesn't always work out. Yes, I broke into the shack. Othie didn't even lock the door and found them in the living room. He had already started to deal with her, and I shot at the wall so that they would definitely pay attention to me. They jumped up, Jody screamed at me, and the bastard started threatening me. I don't know, maybe he was just as brazen, but a smart person doesn't threaten someone holding a 45 pointed at him. The bastard grabbed something, I think it was a lamp, as if he was going to hit me on the head, and took a step forward, and I pulled the trigger. I didn't really aim, I was too upset, but the shot hit like I was aiming, and I hit him right in the groin. I realized that I was now in big trouble because in Albemarle County, even a husband who shot his wife's lover would not get away with it, although he should. Anyway, I just turned and walked out the door. I fired twice more, puncturing 2 tires on Jody's car, and ran over and pulled out the telephone cable going into the shack. I needed to get away, and the only way to do that was to keep them from calling the police until I had a good lead. I drove home as quickly as possible, grabbed some things and my $22,000 in cash, and headed out again, still in the rental car, and drove south toward Tennessee. Tennessee? Linda asked me. How did you end up here? That's it. I knew I had to get rid of the rental car, and I was counting on the local guys in the middle of nowhere to help me do it easily. I needed new wheels, and it didn't take long. The rental car cost a lot more than the truck, to which I changed it, and the guys knew it. They even gave me the real numbers. The fact is that they had an old portable TV, and there was news on how a doctor was killed in Virginia while he was with another man's wife. The shot shouldn't have been fatal, but somehow it was. I found out later that by disabling Jody's car and phone, I didn't give her a chance to call for help quickly enough, and even though she was a nurse, the wound was too severe and he died of blood loss. I didn't mean to kill him. Either way, I realized that now I really need to disappear. Virginia has the death penalty and they use it, and killing a doctor of high social status, even if he slept with your wife, is a capital crime. I could have gotten away with life in prison, but there was no way in hell I was going to rot in prison because of him. So I did something deliberate. I took the truck to North Carolina, took I-81 south, and stopped at a gas station. I had 4 5-gallon jerry cans in the back seat, and I filled them up as well as the gas tank and paid for it using my old credit card. I wanted to make sure I was spotted in Carolina heading south. After that, I turned around at the next exit and headed north. I drove on I-81 until I got to I-84, then crossed onto I-95 and headed into Maine. I knew I needed to leave the country, and I had a lot of time to think about it. The remote corners of Canada were the last place anyone would look for me. So how did Jack Armstrong become Claude Duvalier? At that moment, I realized that the story I told had turned into a frank admission that I had killed a person. That's it. I knew there were some corners in Pennsylvania, and I dumped the truck I had on another old truck. This time it was a Jeep, making sure it had 4-wheel drive and an electric winch on the front. Me had to pay another $500, but I got a full gas tank, a can on the back bumper, and kept my 4 5-gallon cans. They even hooked me up to my 36 and some ammo plus another license plate. But that was another $500. Cost me a fake ID, Pennsylvania driver's license. I was afraid of being stopped because I only had an original Virginia license, and now I was a wanted man. Anyway, I got to Maine and was looking for a way to cross the border. This was easy enough since this was long before 911, and no one cared about Americans crossing the border into Canada, and I now had a fake driver's license under a different name. Once I arrived in Maine, I bought some reliable camping gear that no one was interested in purchasing and headed to Canada. I decided to avoid Quebec because I don't speak French and... Linda laughed at me. But now you're as Claude Duvalier as that Quebec name can be. Yeah, well, it was Claude's bad luck and my luck. What, you didn't kill him, did you? No, he was already dying. I came across this land and Claude. He fell into an old bear trap and his leg was broken, an open fracture. In any case, he could not get out and was in unbearable pain for several days when I found him. I was able to free him, made a stretcher, and we, following his instructions, got to this hut. It was the closest place anyway. The fact is that he was dying, and he understood it. Gangrene set in along with the infection, and even if the doctor could save him, he would no longer be able to live here, especially if he lost his leg. In any case, Claude thanked me for not leaving him to die on the street like a dog, and said that the cabin was now mine if I buried him on his land. Claude died the next day, and I carried out his last wishes. He is buried on the top of that hill, with the best view of his land that his spirit could have wished for. With that, I stood up, took out some whiskey that I had saved, poured 2 glasses, and invited Linda to drink with me to the spirit of Claude Duvalier. After that, I checked the stew. It was ready. Without a word, Linda and I moved around the small kitchen, getting out plates and utensils to serve the stew and enjoy dinner. I lit more oil lamps as the sky darkened. In winter, the sun sets early, before 5 p.m. at the western end of the Atlantic time zone, and our afternoon hours are long. Linda ate with gusto, as if she had not eaten a full meal for a long time. There wasn't much conversation until I pointed out that it was evening, and she shouldn't try to get back to her hut at night, given the low temperatures here and the possibility of wolves and forests. I will prepare a place for myself on the floor, I said. The guest of honor gets a real bed. I didn't want her to get scared and go out into the woods at night, afraid that I would try to harass her. She objected, saying that she was the beggar here and she should take the floor, not me, but I was adamant in my refusal. I wanted to ease the tension, so I asked her about her story. We became closer than I expected when I told her about my life. She was the first person I ever trusted, and it has been 22 years since I crossed the border into Canada and became Claude Duvalier. I knew that something was bothering her, deep in her soul. Something made her go into this God-forsaken wilderness. I guess, she began, I should say that my story is more recent than yours. She hesitated again. I was married to a guy who was just as much of a bastard as the one you knew. Robert Morgan, that's my husband. Well, he loved to have fun. I put up with it over and over again, all for the sake of our children. We have 3 boys. Robert Jr. is now 32, Sean is 28, and Scott is 26. However, Robert began to move away from available women as he grew older. I don't know, maybe because he looked his age, but he never grew up. He always wanted teenagers and 20-somethings. By the time Scott turned 18, Robert was 44 and no longer attracted to cute young girls. But easily accessible women don't care, so of course he was able to find them. The thing is, girls like these cost money, and Robert was draining our savings. Plus, one of them gave him crack to smoke, and he got hooked on that shit. Well, I exploded over this. I stopped worrying about all the bitches he slept with, and I think my self-esteem was at 0. But when the electricity and heating bills started coming back, I just lost my head and threw a bottle at him. Naturally, I missed, but he didn't, and he beat me for it. I couldn't stand it anymore and ran out of the house straight into the arms of a policeman. Robert was arrested and taken into custody, once it became obvious that he was hooked on something. Then they dropped the charges, but required that he undergo detoxification and rehabilitation. He lost his job because of this, but it wasn't that important since he spent all his money on bitches and substances anyway. Sounds like a real prize, I said. Oh, he was a real jerk, but I was married to him, and we had kids early enough that I was stuck with him. I started to regain my self-respect while he was away and told myself I wouldn't do it again. Put up with his crap. The problem is that I let him back into the house when he came back, and he started beating me again, although this time he didn't use his fists. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed the knife. The idiot laughed and said he would take it. I have a knife. But he couldn't. He tried, but he was half drunk and he tripped, and I don't think I even thought. But when he tripped on me, I stuck the knife down, hit him in the back, and he died right there. Of course, I knew that the police would never believe that it was self-defense, because the wound was from behind. I grabbed what I could, took his beat-up old truck, and just drove off. I didn't have much cash, so I had to use my cards for fuel, although I always took cash back, you know. That put a few bucks in my pocket, and once I had enough for a few bucks, I changed direction, going here instead of Nova Scotia. I found this place off the beaten track, bought what I thought I'd need, and got lost, you know. They'll never notice that old truck from the road. not where it's parked. I carried away Scott's old rifle and some ammo, but I had almost nothing left and was almost broke for dollars. I have enough gas left in the truck to drive to Fredericton, maybe get a job somewhere for food and cash, and then come back to hide. Hell, Linda's story was much shorter than mine, but she was much more desperate. I mean, I can't go back to the States without worrying about it again. Appear to be in prison, but I now have the real Claude's Canadian ID. I was able to get a fake ID for Claude after he died, but when it came time to renew, I was able to make it real. When the real Claude would have turned 65, since I was now him, I was able to receive his old age pension, although it was not large. Linda could never do that. She would have been arrested if she tried to claim her benefits. Hell, she couldn't even go to a clinic to get her medication, despite free medical care in Canada, because she'd get arrested. One thing about living this far north in the snowy forests, it gets dark early and people naturally go to bed early. Linda took charge of cleaning up after dinner after I showed her where the hand water pump was, and I got out some spare bedding to make a nest on the floor. Of course, the floor was hard, but I slept in much worse conditions in my life. However, while I was busy, she showed determination and crawled under the blankets I had laid on the floor. Linda, this is for me, I insisted. But whatever the punch her dead husband had knocked out of her, she found it again and refused. I'll sleep here, and if you insist, then you'll sleep in the bed with me, and you said you wouldn't pester me. Damn it, Linda, you're a guest here. It doesn't matter, Claude, or Jack, or whoever you are. I'm staying here. With that, she sat down on the bed on the floor, chatting while I added wood to the stove to keep it burning for the night. I went to the toilet outside, and when I returned, I turned off the oil lamps. The only light was from the glass doors on the wood stove. With Linda firmly planted on the floor, I climbed into my warm, cozy bed. Ideas were swirling in my head. How can I make sure Linda can survive? Canada has a great social security system, but if she tries to take advantage of it, she will be arrested. Yes, she acted in self-defense, but it still turns out that she stabbed a man in the back, plus she ran away. It will always look bad in court, even with her husband's past. Remember, he went through detox and rehab, but he had no criminal record. Linda, I whispered to her, maybe we should get married. What? Are you crazy? We just met. Why would we do this? No, look, this could work. We don't have to live as husband and wife, but here's what we can do. We can sneak back to Maine, and you can get fake American papers. It's really not that hard. Then we'll go back to Canada, let's get married, and voila, you will become Canadian through marriage to me, and you will be able to receive health care and eventually a retirement pension. So a real Canadian becomes a fake American, so she can marry a real American who is a fake Canadian, so she can become a Canadian immigrant. Do you realize how stupid that sounds? Yeah, it sounds stupid, I know, but it could work, right? In town, they won't check your documents too carefully just to get a marriage certificate. They can. Hell, if we did this, and I'm not saying I agree, wouldn't it be easier to get married in Maine? After all, you have a real Canadian ID and your marriage laws are simpler, aren't they, is it? I thought about it, and it actually made sense. American IDs aren't usually checked very carefully except for flying, so a fake driver's license for her, especially one from another state like New Hampshire, wouldn't raise much suspicion, and my Canadian ID was genuine. I really was Claude Duvalier. And it will only be a marriage of convenience, right? You won't expect anything else? Linda insisted on this. I think she really had no reason to trust men. Yeah, that's all it's going to be. No pressure on you about anything. Well, I'll have to think about it. Are you sure you're not married to that bitch in Virginia anymore? Oh, I'm sure she divorced me after I disappeared, but even if she didn't, she's married to Jack Armstrong, and I'm Claude Duvalier. Yeah, okay, I need to go to the bathroom. With these words, Mommy Linda stood up, took my flashlight, and went outside. I noticed that she hadn't brought enough clothes to try to get back to her hut, so my crazy suggestion didn't seem to scare her too much. Her absence gave me a few more minutes to think. Yes, it could work, although it would have to wait until spring. Finding someone in Maine who could make false documents would be much easier once the ice and snow melted. Besides, by that time people will have run out of winter supplies and will need money, and perhaps fake documents will be cheaper. After all, these documents alone cost me $100 back in 1988 when everything was simpler. It's been 22 years since then, and things have only gotten more complicated, especially since 911. However, I was confident it could be done, and Linda's idea that it would be easier to have our sham wedding in Maine rather than New Brunswick was probably smart. One way or another, she would still have to eventually apply for Canadian citizenship, which would be weird, but not too difficult. After all, she was never arrested for the murder of her hapless husband, so her fingerprints were never recorded anywhere. Linda went back inside, shaking off the cold, exclaiming "BRRR" coming from her, and with a touch of snowflakes on her park. It must have started snowing again. She took off her parka and boots and returned to the bed on the floor. She looked at me and must have made her decision because she then climbed into bed with me. "It may be a sham marriage," she said, "but it means you really have to keep me warm at night." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.